My name is Eryn Correa. I'm a lawyer. I own my own practice called Correa Legal, and I focus on servicing startups and social entrepreneurs. It's a very fun demographic to work with. I've been doing this I've been practicing law for almost 10 years, which is hard for me to even wrap my head around. And I've done it in a lot of different ways. So servicing startups is fun because I'm able to offer a bunch of different kinds of advice. But today we're going to be talking specifically about social enterprise and social entrepreneurship. You all know what I mean when I say social entrepreneurship. Okay, you don't. Yeah. And so, what was your interest in hearing this lecture in particular? That maybe I can tailor it a little bit to what you guys want to hear about. I'm going to pick on you guys because you're in person rather than the people online. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm a robotics graduate student.
Okay.
I generally at some point like to make some solutions which can make the world a better place. Clean up the environment and ourselves. And we happen to be aware of legal considerations that will come.
Great. Wonderful. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'm also interested in social entrepreneurship, and I want to learn more about like opportunities, maybe tax benefits. I don't know risks that the entrepreneur needs to know about.
Okay, great. Yeah, we can talk about that too. Anybody else? Welcome. All right, then we'll get started. Let me get some quick. Okay, it should work now. Okay, so this is what we're going to cover today. What a social enterprise is. It's helpful just to get on the same page with that. The benefits of being a social enterprise and the risks. As a lawyer, my job is really to make sure you guys are aware of the risks so you can make informed decisions about the risks. It's a lot of risk management. How you balance your commitment to a social mission and these risks. Fundraising considerations, because that's always the questions I get about being a social enterprise. And how to make the best determination for what you want to do or the kind of company you want to start. So first, a social enterprise is a for-profit organization. And I want to be very clear that it's for-profits that we're talking about. I sit on the board of nonprofits, but I know very little about nonprofit law, and that's almost by design because it's complicated and it gets into more areas of law that I don't know as well. But for-profit social enterprise is a different animal, and that's what we talk about. How it is that you do well by doing good. And so here, the definition really is it reevaluates the priorities of a traditional corporation. Traditional corporation is focused on maximizing shareholders' bottom line, maximizing the company's bottom line. When we talk about a social enterprise, we're talking about a triple bottom line. So not only interested in your financial bottom line, but also the impact on society and the environment. We're also profit, people, and the planet. Now, I've never gotten these two videos to work, but I'm hoping this year will be the year. So why be a social enterprise? Why is it that you should focus on something other than your bottom line? And so first, I want to talk about what traditional corporations look like, what it looks like to only focus on the bottom line. Will it work? Yeah. Let's see.
ECBO started as my college project, and
this is not it, but close.
All around.
Okay.
We communicate with the other people. It is fundamentally a part of what we wish to communicate about ourselves. We used to have a system, a fashion system. That has absolutely nothing to do with the fashion industry today. It has been reinvented.
The space on materials. The problem is that it comes at a really high price.
Factory collapsed, killing more than 1,000.
Last November, 112 people were killed in another major factory fire. 30,000
Garment workers in Bangladesh are paying the price for cheap clothing.
Well, the promise of globalization was that it was going to be a win-win. consumers in the rich world get cheaper goods, and people in the poorer parts of the world get jobs, and with those jobs give them an opportunity to work their way out of poverty.
This enormous rapacious industry that is generating so much profit, why is it that it is unable to support millions of its workers' profit?
The actual business model is completely unsustainable. Unless you change that model, you can't change anything.
When everything is concentrated on making profits, what you see is that human rights, the environment, workers' rights get lost.
Okay, so that is an incendiary example of what we're talking about, which is what it looks like to live in a world where we're only focused on the corporate bottom line. I will say that's an incendiary example. They want you to watch the movie, which I do recommend, but also an incendiary example to prove my point, right? Not all corporations are like that. There are corporations that do a lot of good in the world, and there's a lot of ways for them to do good in the world. But an industry like this is still allowed to exist, meaning with a focus on the bottom line like this, it is able to be done to the detriment of anything else. There's a quote in that trailer that says, when there's only the focus on the bottom line, workers' rights, human rights, and the environment get lost. And it's what we've allowed, which is why it's sort of my interest in social enterprise, is because we can take the impact of corporations and we can make it a positive one rather than a particularly negative one. And so this is the counterbalance to what that looks like, which is a local example. If I can get this.
Paul O'Neill may be best known as Secretary of the Treasury under President George W. Bush. But it's a difficult call he made years before that altered the course of a major American company and literally saved lives in the process.
I can't say to you, this is all one group or all another group.
In 1987, O'Neill became CEO of one of the largest and oldest aluminum companies in the world, Alcoa. On the eve of its centennial, the storied corporation was in trouble. Inefficient, rapid expansion had left profits dwindling, morale waning. Putting O'Neill in charge was a big change. In nearly 100 years, Alcoa had never hired an out-of-house CEO. Someone who had not climbed through the ranks of the tightly knit management system and who was not well versed in metal-making. The company was in for a surprise with the first decision O'Neill made. Executives and shareholders thought it was bizarre, unorthodox, and indifferent to the bottom line. So what was that decision? Let's find out. When you came to Alcoa, describe what the company was like in terms of its financial situation.
It was a company that had some difficulties. They have been losing market share, and profits were not nearly good enough to cover their cost of capital.
So what was the first thing they decided to do?
So the first day I was there, I asked the vice president who was then in charge of safety to come and show me the facts about where Alcoa. In those days, they were really quite good in terms of safety. Their injury rate per 100 workers per year was 1.86, almost 2 injuries per 100 workers that cost people to miss one day work. At that time, the national rate in the United States was 5 injuries per 100 workers. So after I praised the vice president for doing good and doing a great thing, I said to try and think about something because this is what I'm going to do from now on. I'm going to say publicly to everybody who will listen to me, people who work at Alcoa should never be hurt at work. We should have 0 injuries.
So you come into this troubled company, it's this outside scene, and you say the first thing I'm going to focus on is worker safety. Did Wall Street understand you? Did your board understand? Why is this guy focusing on worker safety?
Well, it took a while. I tell you, the people who've been working with this for a long time, they didn't say to my face, but behind my back, they were saying, he doesn't know anything about making aluminum. It's 2,000-degree metal floating around the plant. They're flying overhead cranes. They're forklift truck racing around these massive factory floors. And he doesn't understand. But as soon as the metal prices go down, he'll shout out that we could go on being as good as we already are. Health and safety, and I knew I would have this kind of reaction. But first time I came to Wall Street, they invited me to come and have a luncheon meeting with the New York financial analyst community and big amphitheater down in Wall Street, taking 250 people. And so I got up and I said to them, well, the first thing I want to talk to you about is safety. And then they were like, what is this guy supposed to be talking about? Margin improvement and, you know, more aluminum cars. What's he doing talking about safety?
You decide to focus on worker safety really as a path of changing the culture of the place, showing that you can always improve at any.
What would you think? I believe that human beings have what I call discretionary energy that they can give you or not. And I don't think they will give it to you if they don't feel that they're treated with dignity and respect every day. If people can say, I'm treated with dignity and respect, the down payment on this, nobody ever gets hurt here because we care about our own commitment to our safety, and we care about the people we work with, and it swells up into everything you do, so it creates a sense of pride about the organization you're involved in.
And then you start asking them for increased productivity and increased
and activity. That's what I have to ask for. You need to turn and loose.
Describe how did we
Well, we went from 1.86 for 100 workers per year, having the increase in profit of the long birthday. We got to 0.13. To give you a reference point, the number in top medical care institution in the United States is 5. Right.
And now describe what happened to our color.
Well, we improved the market capitalization of the company 900% while I was there. So we went from basically a company that's market value to $4 billion to $28 billion in 13 years.
And you were driven by the sort of it was that
it was bringing people together and releasing their energy in a positive way.
So then they believed it.
Yes.
So I've always liked that example, again, because it is local. But also because when Fareed Zakari asked him, so how did Alcoa do? And he states this key metrics, and then he asked him again, but financially, how did they do? And it's a good counterbalance to what we're talking about, which is a focus on the bottom line can have some unintended negative consequences. But a focus on your employees and other aspects of your business can have some unintended or maybe intended positive consequences. And so this is what the research is starting to bear out, that in becoming a social enterprise, you actually have a better chance of mitigating your risk because you're making holistic long-term decisions rather than short-term decisions about cheap labor, cheap equipment, not paying attention to your social and environmental impact and kicking those things down the road, and then they come back to bite you later. It does also change your investor profile, and we'll talk more about that later, meaning you're going to have and attract investors who are aligned with your social mission, harder or easier depending on who you're going after. It attracts talent. I just taught this over at the law school at Pitt, and one of us kept saying how a friend of his was choosing between 2 companies, and one of them had more of a social mission but offered her a little bit less, and the other one was offering her a little bit more for about the same money, and she decided to take that job because of their social mission. Just also starting to bear out with how not only millennials, and I think also Gen Z wants to be working, and who they want to be working for, making sure that their values are aligned with the company that they're giving their time to. It has a certain amount of benchmarking. With being a social enterprise, you have to measure your social and environmental impact, meaning you have an understanding of what that is, meaning you can make decisions based on that information rather than sort of winging it and figuring out later that you've caused some environmental disaster. And finally, builds trust with your brand, because people understand that you are taking care of your employees, the environment, society, your consumers, when you do have this social mission, rather than the distrust that comes from, oh, you're just another company that wants to make a lot of money. And it's bearing out financially. So this is what Paul O'Neill was talking about, which is not only do we have this feel-good aspect of a social enterprise, we also have a financial aspect of the social enterprise that now studies are being done over 10 or 20 years saying, if you look at these statistics, financially, these companies are doing well. But it's important, especially if you're starting out, that we add a caveat and let's say it's over the long term. In the short term, as you're building your company, there are things and risks you need to be aware of, because you're not an established public company like Alcoa, at least not yet. You are still in the early stages where you're conscious of cost and impact and administrative burdens that you have. So that's what we're going to talk about. Is what are the risks of becoming a social enterprise, where you're focused on not just your bottom line, but also your impact on the society and environment. First is resource allocation. It might just be you. It might be you and a co-founder. My business is just me. I understand what it's like to have 1,000 different decisions to make in any given day. Only have so many hours in a day to make those decisions, and only so much money to put towards those decisions. And I have to make calls between the values that I have towards how I want to treat people and also the money that I have in the bank to make those decisions. So this is a real thing when you're starting your business. Second, from a legal viewpoint, is social enterprise is still new. This is still a relatively new concept. And from the court side, it hasn't really been tested in court. So we have what the law says about social enterprise. But in terms of how it will act out in the real world, there's no sort of backstop. So there's a lot of risk that can be undertaken in not knowing if you're going to be crossing a line that a court is later going to find is an issue. There's potentially expanded liability for your directors and officers, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The idea is, again, you're making decisions not just based on your bottom line, but based on your societal and environmental impact. So if you're having a negative societal and environmental impact, what is the liability that you face for messing that up? Additional business or reputational risk, meaning you say that you're going to do good things in the world and then you don't. You say that you're not going to pollute and then you do. So you've set yourself up to a higher standard so that when you fall from that standard, it's a little bit more of an impact than it would be otherwise. And then investment opportunities. You're telling your investors that you're not just focused on their bottom line and making them as much money as possible. You're also focused on these other areas. Not all investors want to hear that, I would say. So it's making sure that you're aware of what you're doing from an early stage. As much as I'd love to put a thumb on the scale, and I think I do, for social enterprise, I also understand that when you're setting up, there are just additional risks and additional considerations you have to be thinking about. So how do you balance this commitment and risk? On the one hand, high commitment to your values means there's high risk in how it is that you'll be undertaking those values. On the other hand, got low commitment to those values, low risk, because you're going to go down a path that has been around for generations. Since, ancient Roman times is when the corporation was started. So you've got a lot of history behind you versus a newer entity. And how do you balance those two things, especially from a newer? And here's how I think. I'll put them back on the little seesaw in a second, but these are the ways you can do it. And they kind of go in descending order, which is the most commitment you can make is to incorporate as a benefit corporation. Talk about what that is. Second is you can amend your governance documents to bake your values into these documents, but not exactly become a benefit corporation with the added burdens. You can amend your corporate policies. Again, you don't have to become a benefit corporation, but you can say our policy is we don't pollute, our policy is we recycle, you can incorporate that in. Or there's B Corp certification, which we'll talk about. It fits in a weird place, but B Corp certification is a third party nonprofit certification, like LEED certification, like Fair Trade Organic. The third party looks at your metrics and says, yes, you qualify for this, no, you don't. But they tie in a little bit to each other, so it's a weird outlier. Oh, maybe I deleted that slide. Okay. The way that it's supposed to be is benefit corporations are on the one hand, and amending your corporate policies are sort of on the other hand. So first, benefit corporations. This is a legal entity. This is like an LLC. This is like a C Corp. This is something that you can incorporate as when you go to incorporate in Pennsylvania or Delaware, or wherever you're going. This is a separate kind of entity. Legal, it's not legal in every state. Legal, and the last time I checked, it was somewhere between 38 and 40, but there's not a lot of statistics on it for some reason. And it is legal in Pennsylvania and Delaware. It makes your commitment to not only your shareholders, but the stakeholders, your community, your environment, the society, your consumers, legally binding. So when you or your officers or your directors are making a decision, they're legally required to take into account the impact on society, environment, consumers, employees. So it expands the kind of decision-making that you're looking at. In Pennsylvania, you have to appoint somebody on your board that is a specific benefit director. So again, when you're thinking about this, that's an extra person. That has to be an independent person. It can't be somebody who works for your company. It can't be somebody who's invested in your company. It has to be somebody that is outside of your company as it's formed. So I had a client who wanted to appoint his sister as a benefit director, and that didn't work because she's an interested party as a relative. It requires the filing of an annual benefit report. So every year, and in addition to everything else that you're doing, you have to stop and file an annual benefit report that says, yes, I attained my goals as a public benefit corporation. No, I didn't, and here's why not. So I've drafted these for my clients. It takes about 4 or 5 hours of my time to do that, plus their time reflecting the information to make sure that I have the metrics to say whether or not they did it. So again, as a new company, that's an added administrative and financial burden for you. The costs are pretty straightforward, same as incorporating any other entity in Pennsylvania. It's $125, $70 to file your annual reporting fee, plus your lawyer fees in drafting your bylaws and your operating fees and all your other legal documents, which might be a little bit more expensive because they are specialized rather than standardized documents, and lawyer fees in drafting your benefit report. So this here is the most commitment you can make. Benefit corporation, legally binding obligations to your stakeholders, and you're undertaking a little bit more expensive lawyer costs and taking this under.
I have an online question.
Please.
Are there tax advantages of becoming a benefit corporation?
This is a question I get all the time. No. Yes.
Why are we calling this conflict and why are getting more comfortable?
Also a great question. Also a question I get. Because this is really, it's about accountability. So say that you have a social mission that you care about, or an environmental mission that you care about. This makes sure that you stay true to it. And so it's a little bit of tying your own hands to make sure that, as there always will be, there's an inflection point between values and cash and how much cash you have in hand. This makes it so you go towards your values over your cash, more or less. And it also means that, say you're the one that's interested in being a benefit corporation, and after you retire, you resign, you sell out for a huge payout, this still has to be a benefit corporation. So it ensures a certain amount of sustainability and longevity to your mission. And I do have, actually most of my clients are benefit corporations. They have made this commitment to their values this way. Also in the understanding that over the long term, they will fare better, they'll make more money, they'll have a bit more investment in their employees to make that kind of money, but it is a gamble they're taking in their early stages. Next, you can amend or you can use your corporate document to incorporate your values without becoming a benefit corporation. So it's sort of taking the cafeteria buffet of everything that benefit corporations have to offer and picking what works best for you. And so I've done this for clients as well, which is we take your operating agreement, we take your bylaws, and we say your directors and officers have to consider stakeholders and not just shareholders when making decisions. The upside is it provides a little protection for your officers and directors who want to make decisions like that, but there's less administrative burden. So you don't have the annual benefit report, which means that you aren't necessarily tracking your metrics, which means you have a little bit more leeway in tracking those metrics. And it allows you to expand to be a benefit corporation later, if at these early stages you have time and resources that need to go elsewhere, but you still want to make sure that these values are baked in at sort of a high level. Does that make sense? Yeah, so far so good. And it's about the same cost. The only cost that you save is there's no benefit report that you have to file. Next, corporate policies. So these are internal documents. These, I would say, are the least risky because they are internal. It requires less work to amend them in case you do need to make changes. But you can take your values and you can say then your mission statement, this is who we are. You can say in your hiring policy, these are the people that we hire. You can say, this is our recycling policy. That makes it so that those values are written down somewhere. As a lawyer, I prefer you write everything down, except for the stuff that will get you in trouble. But I like to have written policies because it acts as an organizational principle for you. So we have something we can point to say, this is who we are, this is how we act, this is how we want to do things. But it's easier to change than like your bylaws or your operating agreement. If you decide you want to go a different direction with your policy, you can amend it much more easily than you would with those other foundational documents. And I'll say again, if you're a benefit corporation or you're anything else, like you still are drafting all of these documents. But what I'm trying to lay out is the array of options you have in front of you to sort of cherry pick how it is you want to incorporate your mission into your corporation, especially at early stages. And then finally is B Corp certification. So like I said, third-party certification. You apply to a place called B Lab, and B Lab has this very extensive B impact assessment. It's something that as a lawyer, I can't help you with because it's very business specific. Like as specific as do you have low flushing toilets in the building that you rent, or what is your healthcare policy, or the only thing I can really help with is the governance aspect of things and helping you write certain policies. But so the B Lab certification is out of 200 points. You have to get, I think it's 80 in order to be a certified B Corp. But if you are a benefit corporation, or if you do have a structure that incorporates stakeholder values into your governance documents, you automatically get 10 points. It's significant because for all those other things, it's like 0.25, 0.171. So starting off from that standpoint actually allows you to move up the chain pretty quickly and have a better chance of being certified. You do have to recertify every 2 years because they're constantly changing those metrics. Certification cost is graded, meaning as a startup, I think you only pay like what, $1,000, but if you get higher, it can be $50,000 or more. So again, another significant cost when you're starting out. And then whoever it is who's helping you with the certification, and the back and forth. Any questions on certification? Okay. So here's where, oh, there it went. So here's the seesaw with the balance. Incorporating as a benefit corporation, highest commitment, but also the highest risk at this point. Redrafting your corporate policies, lowest commitment, also lowest risk. Somewhere in the middle is amending your governance documents and incorporating as a B Corp. And really what this does is give you another layer of how it is you want to structure your company, especially as you're starting out. Now, fundraising considerations, because this is always what I get questions on, especially when you're an early stage company, is what do investors think? On the one hand, it's like any investor, right? Where you have to find an investor, or you should find an investor that is aligned with your mission and values, whether you're a social enterprise or not. And having somebody who understands what you're doing when it comes to social enterprise actually can be a powerful tool for you in how you continue to want to go after your goals and mission. I will say, you know, this is starting to get more popular, even in Pittsburgh. The R.K. Mellon Foundation recently started a fund, a social impact fund, and they have taken part of their endowment, and they're starting to invest it in social enterprise that has to show this kind of impact. They don't require you to be a benefit corporation, but they do require you to have a certain kind of social, environmental, and economic impact, especially in southwestern Pennsylvania. And so there is at least a movement for investors to be looking this way. There's more of a movement investors to be looking this way because there is an understanding that over the long term, this can provide more financial returns. But it has to be an investor who's in it for the long term, not somebody who wants to get in and get out pretty quickly. That said, it's not going to be every investor that's going to be interested in this kind of entity or this kind of vehicle. But at the same time, this isn't just happening at the startup level. At the high public company levels, institutional investors are starting to require this. I have a friend who works for an investment bank on their investor relations team, and she asks public companies that they're invested in, what are your governance standards? How do you make sure that you're considering the environment and your employees and the decisions that you make? And they're taking these concepts from benefit corporations and they're asking their big companies for it. So if we're starting to ask people at the high levels to do this, I wonder what the trickle-down effect will be for startup companies to do this. And then as always, there's less risk in just kind of investing over the long term, but not necessarily in the startup stages. So I've given you a lot of information. What is the best way for you to go about that? One, a little plug, but you should pick a lawyer that understands what you want to do if you decide to go this direction. I think a lot of companies come to me because they've had many lawyers try to talk them out of it, which is fine. But I also think if this is something you're committed to, you want to be working with not just the lawyer, but partners in general who understand your mission, your values, and how you want to incorporate them. Part of that means being clear on what those missions and values are and how you want to incorporate them. And where it is that it's important to you to run a business like this. I would give consideration to where you are in your development. Are you just starting out? Are you a little bit more established? Meaning you can divert some time, attention, money to incorporating these things into your organization, because it is an extra layer of thought. And running a board meeting tomorrow for one of my clients who is a benefit corporation, on the board meeting agenda, we put in environmental and social KPIs. Have they hit them? Do they have ways to measure them? How do we adjust them? And this is a not even yet 2-year-old company. So it's something they are continually thinking about even from their early stages. You should look at your budget, look at your resources, look at your attention, how much you think you can devote to this, or how much you can outsource to somebody who can devote to this. And give yourself room to grow. This is not a decision you have to make at one point and stick to it forever. It's not something that can't be changed later on down the line. So taking a look at what you want to accomplish and how you want to do that and how you want to incorporate it will allow you to have a longer vision for if this is the right way to go for you or not. All right. Any questions?
Yeah. So none of them actually have the tax benefits.
No. So it used to be on a city by city basis, and for a while, Philadelphia was giving people a marginal tax break if you incorporated and were in the city limits. I don't think they do that anymore. I haven't seen it for a while. But no, for the most part, it's very altruistically motivated. Like if the person who wants to do this wants to do it, they will, but they're treated like any other corporation, like a C Corp. Yeah.
So if someone wants to do this, I see two main pillars, I guess. One is the responsibility towards the employee and the employee exclusive period. And the second is the environmental impact. So I'd like to know at what point do you think this should be done, like if someone is interested in doing this, like can you comment on the number of employees on scale at least?
It's a good question. So I would say it's easier to implement this from an early stage even when you're still building, rather than trying to impose it on more people once you've already established a way that you operate or the way that you're doing things. Because setting it from, even if it's just you and you write down, this is my mission, these are my values, this is how we'll be treating people, I think is a little bit easier to do from that early stage when you have fewer people to convince to go a different direction once you want to go that different direction. Now, that said, you know, again, I'm a solo practitioner, there's just me. Eventually, I want to offer healthcare to employees that I have, but I'm not doing that. I don't even take healthcare from my own business right now. So I'm like, it's something I have in mind, right? But until I have other employees or even the money to hire those other employees, it's not going to be something I implement. So it's thinking through, I unfortunately don't have like at 10 employees, you should do this, 15 employees, you should do this. I would say start out with what the goals are of how you want your employees to be treated, how you want your consumers to be treated. Look at what your environmental impact could be and have those goals written out. And as you're doing it, I think as you go along, you'll figure out what are the right ways to implement those policies. Similarly, looking at the B Corp certification, even if you're not going to do it, you can sign up for free to look at it, which is what I've done as well. And they give you good categories and metrics for things that maybe you should be thinking about. So when you go to do it, you're like, oh, I'm not starting from ground zero to say, this is how I should be treating my employees. It's like, oh, maybe I should be providing healthcare, or I should be providing a living wage, or I should be providing this. And they can lay out those things for you to start, at least get the wheels turning for how you want to do it and how you want to grow. Yeah.
And I'd also like to know, like, you know, how do you gauge your environmental impact and other metrics?
So this also, I look mostly at two things, either the B impact assessment, or I work with people who do sustainability analytics. And those people can say much more concretely, these are my greenhouse gas emissions, for example, or this is the percent I've been recycling, or this is my water usage. So those, again, as a lawyer, I'm sort of limited in my own substantive knowledge of the impact of these. I can only set up the framework to make the decision with me easy. But when it comes to action measuring and changing that framework, then it's bringing on people who will have more expertise in that. Any other questions?
Can you give a comment on a trend, like what direction was company like going forward to among the four options?
So I have a skewed view on this, I think, because most of my companies are benefit corporations. And if they're not, they're converting to benefit corporations. So my limited experience is that most people go towards the benefit corporations. That said, I would say what I'm seeing from sort of a larger standpoint, like public company standpoint, is that they do sort of that middle tier, which is amending their documents and amending so that they take the parts of benefit corporations that work for them, but they're not held to the law itself, which can be a little bit different. And I think I like the benefit corporation as a lawyer. I like that because it gives me standards, it gives me guidelines for how that company should act. But that said, you can still import a lot of those concepts without incorporating like that. So I think, especially for early stage companies, I at least let them know that they can incorporate those concepts without being a benefit corporation. I just have had fewer companies go that direction. But I'd say that's probably the least risky and probably the most accessible. Anything else?
Can you share like an experience you had when someone filing for a benefit corporation and that company did it at a later stage?
They did what?
At a later stage, once their organization is bigger, you said it's best to do it early on, right? So what are the kinds of challenges you see?
So a company that hasn't done it from an early stage and have imposed it later.
And now they want to file.
Yeah. Yeah, so most of the companies I work with are early stage companies. So the one conversion I've seen is a company that has right now 3 employees and about 10 independent contractors. So it's still, and I think they're probably within their first 2 years, and we converted them this summer. And that was easy enough to do because we hadn't quite appointed their full board yet, so we didn't need the full board's approval. So there was some pushback there. It was still run by those three like sort of C-suite guys. And the hardest part really is from a legal standpoint, less so from sort of a corporate culture standpoint, because they have independent contractors, it's a little bit more fluid, is making sure that when we convert over their initial investment, or we convert over their percent ownership to a different entity, making sure all of that goes without triggering an unintended tax consequence. So it's sort of more the practical standpoint rather than trying to look at the corporate culture standpoint. And we were able to do it, but it took 6 months to make sure that we had everything organized and then could communicate with the right state agencies to get them converted over. Yeah, not sure if that quite answers your question about.
It did, but I'm kind of confused as to what tax implications would have.
So when you're converting from an LLC to a C Corp, you have to take all of your LLC membership interests, all of your ownership interests, and convert them over to share. And when you're doing that, you have to make sure that there's no value that is different between the two. So that when you do that, you trigger income and then some ridiculous tax bill.
I have another question.
Yeah, please.
So, like if I suppose someone starts up and they do, file to be a benefit corporation. So what is my legal obligation to future investors or my own shareholders or any of the stakeholders to tell them that I am a benefit corporation? Can I hide the fact?
Well, if they're good investors, they'll do their due diligence and they'll see your documents to say that you are a benefit corporation. I would say that's probably something foundational you'd have to disclose. Again, because you're saying, I'm not just focused on your bottom line, shareholder, investor, whomever. I have these more diffuse responsibilities to the other people I'm impacting.
And even to like other people you want to bring on to the group, like partners or co-founders.
Yeah.
It's the same.
Yeah. Yeah. If I was your investor or co-founder, I would want to know if I was signing on to that. And I would think you would want them to know too, because without that kind of values alignment, it can make things more difficult. Any other questions? These are good ones. I appreciate that you're curious about it. I love talking about this stuff, so. Yeah. I just taught a whole class, it was 5 days, 3 hours a day. Like, it was great. The support students were like my captive audience for 3 hours a day, so I could talk about this. All right, well, if anything else comes up, please don't hesitate to reach out. Like I said, I love talking about this. It's an entity I believe in, and I'm happy to give you guidance on what it looks like to make the decision as to whether or not to incorporate this into your structure as you're growing. But thank you. Thank you for your time and your attention and your questions.